This time we're going to be talking about the last two steps in those five-fold permaculture water harvesting strategies for water-wise gardening. And these two both have to do with plants. The first is putting the right plant in the right place. So to begin with, this gets back to our idea of zones that we were talking about in the previous class, where we're putting the right plant in the right zone. So we don't want to take a plant that is really reliant on water, something like radishes or beets that require consistent soil moisture, or else they're going to be woody and bold, or too hot, or inedible. The best beets and radishes, cabbage family crops, leafy greens, those are things that you want to put close to where your water resources are. Get to know your plants. The same thing applies for your perennial plants and herbs. You want to put the ones that need a lot of water in the places where they're really going to have access to it and they're going to get the water they need. If you have dry soils or sandy soils, you might want to try investing in those soils first before you plant those water tolerant or water needy crops. We call species pioneer species that are really good for developing and adapting soils that have been degraded and that might have trouble supporting other plants. These are plants that go in early, prepare the soil for us, and prepare the soil for other plants. These include those nitrogen fixers again, and a lot of drought-tolerant plants. So far, we know we have some plants that are going to need a lot of water and other plants that are going to be parsimonious with water, and they're going to be great pioneer species. And in between, we have a set of plants that are great crop plants that require some water, usually during the early season when Michigan has it in abundance. And then they can be dry farmed later in the season and produce a crop based on the soil moisture bank you have built up. It's especially true if you've already invested in developing good soil. These plants include things like your classic Three Sisters planting of corn, beans, squash. We can add a couple of sisters to that, things like amaranth or sunflowers. Another great one is tomatoes. Tomatoes can be dry farmed very well so long as you can keep the plants alive. Tomatoes are actually sweeter in dry weather because the heat and dry concentrates the sugar and you get less water for that sugar to water ratio. You have sweeter, better tasting, more flavorful tomatoes for it. So the key is to know a little bit about your plants and to know where to put them and to think about what their water needs are before you plant. And the final key is to use the right plant spacings. Usually permaculture people simplify this one to say dense plantings, that we always want to keep the soil covered. Because research from groups like Grow Biointensive and actually other university research as well has found that crop systems that densely plant plants to give them just the right amount of space but always keep the soil covered will, rather than compete with each other more, the cooperation factor actually outweighs the competitive one, and the plants work together to conserve soil moisture. They can each get what they need, but they keep the soil moisture bank intact better than sparse plantings of widely spaced out plants. The hands down best resource I can recommend to you is the book How to Grow More Vegetables by John Jevons. This is also available as a series of free PDFs on the Grow Biointensive website. Jevons was inspired by old-fashioned French biointensive gardening and his mentor Alan Chadwick. The book and free materials are filled with charts and garden diagrams to show you the correct plant spacings, the optimal plant spacings for all your favorite garden vegetables and plants. At Lily House, we've developed a strategy of letting a lot of our vegetables self-sow into this continuous green cover crop. As the plants grow, we then use John Jevons' charts to determine the precise spacings that we want our plants to have, and we thin out the vegetables to achieve those spacings, always keeping Jevons' optimal numbers in mind. The best way to figure that out is to start by using Jevons plant spacings in creating polycultures, and then over time you'll figure out which things you can let self-sow and how to thin them out to get the right spacings that Jevons would recommend. And that's true for almost all of the season. The one place where I recommend against that is once we get into dry farming. Once we get into dry farming, we might want to think about wider spacings for the plants. A good example of this is the way Native Americans planted their Three Sisters gardens. They would typically plant in our region corn in clusters several feet apart, or a few feet apart, with a living ground cover of squash and weeds running through in between there. That kind of planting mimicked the sort of plant spacings that you see in natural ecosystems in time of drought. If you were to look around Michigan's wild thickets and wild places, you'll notice the same pattern, where in the spring when moisture is abundant, you see lush, vibrant growth, packed in, dense, natural planting. But as the summer heat weighs down and drought appears, you get a natural thinning out of the herbaceous layer in the forest. And you get a natural thinning out of the plant densities in other ecosystems as well. So that's exactly the kind of thing that we're mimicking when we do dry farming and without irrigation. In that case, we're going to mimic nature, and all of those plants that would have been in the natural ecosystem that die back for the year in times of drought, cover the soil and protect the ones that are still going to stay alive and thrive as a layer of organic mulch. So when we dry farm, we're going to do the same thing. Heavy mulching and slightly wider plant spacing. Take your recommended plant spacings and increase them by 1/2. That's one recommendation from real dry climates in dry farming. So we can have a really good sophisticated understanding of how we plant our plant spacings for the season, for the kind of plant that we're using, and the more we play around with this and experiment, the more precise we can get, the more abundant our gardens can become. So there we have it. A complete permaculture approach to water that starts with holistic site design and then recommends for the best quality investments we can make. We can save that water by converting it into food and productivity, all while building our soil, reducing our weeding, and other maintenance work. That is a great example of permaculture design. Next time, we're going to get even deeper into this idea of plantings, plant spacings, and designing great polycultures. Our whole next course is entirely devoted to polycultures, polyculture theory, and guild theory, and how we can turn our gardens into complete ecosystems that really help take care of themselves. Hope you'll tune in then. Thanks. Bye.